I'm Amber, 29 years old, and last month my grandfather left me his entire estate worth over $2 million. The day after the funeral, my mother Patricia demanded I sign it over to her. When I refused, all hell broke loose. This morning, I received a text about an important family meeting. Walking into my childhood home, I froze. My mother, siblings, stepfather, and two men in expensive suits stared at me. "Remember," my mother said with a cold smile. "Meet our lawyers." I wasn't prepared for what happened next. For those listening who've ever watched the people who raised you become strangers for the sake of money, you already know how that moment feels. Your stomach drops, your skin goes cold, and you realize nothing will ever be the same again. I grew up in a family where appearances mattered more than anything. Patricia, my mother, is the kind of woman who can walk into a room and immediately command attention, not through kindness or grace, but sheer force of will. As a child, I learned early how to read her moods, how to avoid her wrath, how to make myself useful. But my usefulness was always conditional. She liked to say we were a team, a family, but what she meant was, do what I say, or you're on your own. My siblings, Rachel and Jason, figured that out early. Rachel became the beauty queen, always smiling, always agreeable. Jason, diagnosed with mild learning disabilities, learned to play helpless. And me? I became invisible, except to my grandfather Harold. Grandpa Harold was the only steady presence in my life. While Patricia was off chasing whatever new scheme promised fast money or prestige, he was the one who taught me how to balance a checkbook, how to change a tire, and how to tell the truth, even when it hurt. He owned a hardware store empire, a real one, not just a few shops. He built it from nothing. And every Saturday, starting when I was 13, I sat beside him in his office, learning how business really worked. He'd say, "Nothing worth having comes easy, Amber. Not respect, not money, and definitely not peace." When I graduated high school, I had a scholarship waiting. My acceptance to the business program at State was my ticket out. Grandpa offered to pay for the rest, my housing, books, anything the scholarship didn't cover. But Patricia intercepted. Suddenly, there was no money. Rachel needed surgery. Jason needed a car. Grandpa gave in, but I saw the look in his eyes when he handed over the check. So I worked. I took out loans. I skipped meals and juggled shifts at the bookstore and waitressing jobs just to stay afloat. Grandpa still sent me envelopes when he could, always with a note, "Don't tell your mother." I never did. By the time I was 27, Grandpa's health had declined. Congestive heart failure. I visited him weekly in the hospital, sometimes just sitting in silence, holding his hand. One evening, he looked at me and said, "You're the only one in this family who knows what to do with $1. I've made arrangements. They won't like it, but you're ready." I didn't know what he meant. Not fully. Not until after he passed and his lawyer called me into his office. The will was simple. Clear. The estate, in its entirety, assets, businesses, liquid funds, property, was mine. Not shared. Not divided. Mine. My mother was livid. She said, "This is a mistake." He must have been confused. The lawyer replied, "Mr. Harold Jensen amended his will 5 months before his passing. The documents are airtight." Still, she wasn't done. The day after the funeral, she showed up at my apartment with Rachel and Jason in tow. She brought coffee, fake smiles, and a stack of papers. "Just sign," she said, as though $2 million was something I should hand over out of politeness. I said no. That's when she dropped the mask. The next few weeks were a blur of phone calls, guilt trips, and manipulations. Jason called, sobbing about overdue rent. Rachel hinted she might have to sell her car. My stepfather Craig, always silent until money was involved, left me a voicemail so venomous I deleted it halfway through. I tried to stay calm. Professional. Detached. But inside, I was reeling. And then this morning happened. The family meeting. The text simply read, 3 p.m. at the house. Everyone will be there. I knew it wasn't really a meeting. It was an ambush. When I walked into that living room and saw the lawyers, I knew they were trying something big. Patricia stood tall, smug in her designer blazer, arms folded like a queen surveying her court. My siblings flanked her, quiet but watchful. One of the lawyers said, Ms. Jensen, we're here to discuss the defamation claims your mother has filed against you. I blinked. Excuse me? Patricia said, you've been telling people I pressured your grandfather, that I tried to steal from him. That damages my reputation. And as a public figure, that has consequences. You're not a public figure, I said. She smiled. According to my social media metrics, I am. I stared at her, stunned. This wasn't about the will anymore. This was war. And something in me snapped. I said nothing else. Just turned and walked out. But not because I was defeated. I left because I had just remembered something. Something important Grandpa once told me. He said, when someone shows you what they really are, don't argue. Just make sure you see it. I saw it now. All of it. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. I remembered the sound of his voice more clearly than anything else. Not the money, not the meetings, not even the moment the will was read. Just his voice. Low. Certain. They will come for you. And they won't be subtle about it. I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes after I left that so-called meeting. Engine running. Hands steady, but my breath catching every now and then like something was stuck in my throat. I didn't cry. I wasn't even angry. Not then. What I felt was something else, something slow and cold. A shift. Like a door that had been stuck for years finally swung open inside me. I didn't drive home. Instead, I went to the only place that ever felt like mine, Grandpa's old office, tucked behind the flagship hardware store on Main and Oak Ridge. It hadn't been used much since his health declined. The dust on the windows was thick, the air stale with the kind of silence that made every memory echo louder. The key still worked. Inside, everything was the same. The ledger stacked high in neat columns. His desk, scratched from years of use but always polished. The faint smell of cedar and old paper. I sat down in his chair and just stared at the framed photograph on the wall, Grandpa in his 20s, standing proudly in front of his first store, one hand resting on a shovel, the other on the shoulder of a young employee who would go on to manage 3 locations. He built this life with his bare hands. And he trusted me to continue it. Not just the money. Not just the assets. But the values. The standard. I closed my eyes and thought of the weekends we spent here. 13 years old, knees pressed together, trying to act older than I was as I scribbled notes on margins and expenses. He never spoke down to me. Never dumbed things down. He respected me before I had even done anything to deserve it. That was the difference. He saw me. No one else in my family ever really did. I could still remember being 8 years old, holding a report card with straight A's and watching my mother barely glance at it before asking if I'd seen where she left her scarf. Rachel had come in 5 minutes later, chattering about a beauty pageant she wanted to enter, and suddenly it was all hands on deck. Jason got attention for needing things. Rachel got attention for wanting things. I only got attention when I stopped being convenient. One winter, when I was 11, I stayed home sick for 3 days and my mother forgot to call the school. I got detention for truancy. She laughed when I told her. "Oh, for God's sake, Amber," she said, tossing a bag of shopping on the counter. "Don't be so dramatic." That was always her line. Anytime I spoke up, anytime I hesitated, anytime I looked like I might break the mold she had cast for me. Don't be dramatic. What she meant was, be quiet. Be useful. Be small. The only person who ever corrected her was Grandpa. There was a Sunday dinner once, shortly after I turned 15. I'd won a small business competition at school, created a mock plan for a sustainable garden center and presented it to a panel of local business owners. I came in second. I was proud of it. I told the family at dinner. Patricia barely looked up from her wine. She said, "Oh, second place? So you lost." Grandpa set down his fork. Not loudly. Not theatrically. Just enough to silence the room. He said, "Only a fool thinks second place is losing." My mother rolled her eyes and started muttering about how we couldn't all live in nostalgia, but she didn't say another word about it. After dinner, Grandpa handed me a business card. "One of the judges wants to meet you," he said. I still had that card. Still remembered the way he winked when I tucked it into my backpack. All these years later, it still made me sit up straighter. That office, that photograph, the echo of his voice, they reminded me who I was. They reminded me that the version of myself that Patricia tried to erase never disappeared. She was still here. Steady. Sharp. Ready. I pulled out my phone. Not to call anyone. Just to read the last text my grandfather ever sent me. It said, "Stay clear. And keep your records." I had receipts. Emails. Voicemails. Ledgers. Legal documents. All of it. I never knew why I held on to everything. I wasn't planning revenge. But maybe he was. I drove home that night with a different kind of energy. Not fire. Not fight. Clarity. Because now I understood, my inheritance was never about wealth. It was about continuity. About values that had skipped a generation and landed in me like a second heartbeat. Patricia saw money as power. But Grandpa saw money as a tool. And now it was my turn to use it. The next morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Her name was Elaine. She was Grandpa's estate attorney, not the man who handled the will with us, but the private one he trusted with sensitive things. She had been a quiet presence during my childhood, always present during big family decisions, and always, oddly, kind to me. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "I think it's time we talk." She said, "I've been expecting your call." And in her voice, I heard it again. That same calm resolve I remembered from Grandpa. That same steady pulse that said, "You're not alone." Not anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. There are moments in life that require rest. And there are moments that require awakening. This was the second kind. Because something in me had finally opened, a door that would never close again. People think the worst part is the betrayal. It isn't. The worst part is how fast everything you thought was real begins to rot in your hands. By the time I met Elaine for coffee 2 days later, my mother had already launched a public campaign. Not lawsuits yet, that would have taken effort. Instead, she did what she always did best, perform. Social media. Instagram posts full of vague grief and smiling photos of her and Grandpa. Facebook memories with lengthy captions about honoring Harold's legacy and being robbed by greed. Tweets that didn't name me, but may as well have. Hashtags like #FamilyFirst, #JusticeForDad, #TruthWillWin. She even posted a grainy photo of Grandpa and me from a 4th of July barbecue when I was 10. I was hugging him, my face turned to the side, mid-laugh. The caption read, "She used to love him. Before the money changed her." What Patricia didn't know was that every time she posted something, she exposed a pattern. And patterns were my specialty. Elaine didn't waste time with small talk. We sat at a quiet booth in the back of a bookstore cafe, her laptop open before I finished my drink order. She said, "He documented everything. Not just the will. He left behind journals, emails, private letters, notarized statements. You were right to call." I said nothing, just nodded. She slid a manila folder across the table. I opened it slowly. Inside, copies of text messages, bank statements, and handwritten letters. One caught my eye. Dated just 3 months before his death. Written in his precise script. It read, "Amber, I know this won't be easy. They will turn on you. But I've watched them turn on each other for less. This is not your burden to carry, it is your opportunity to correct what I couldn't. You are not alone. Use your name wisely." My throat tightened, but I kept my face still. Elaine closed her laptop. She said, "Your mother's trying to provoke you. Don't give her what she wants." But Patricia didn't need my reaction to keep escalating. 3 days later, I received a cease and desist letter from a PR firm. Not a legal order, a threat. An attempt to bully me into silence under the guise of brand damage. Rachel had started giving interviews, too. Podcasts, mostly. One titled Air Wars. Another called The Granddaughter Grift. In every one, she painted me as a manipulative, estranged relative who manipulated our grandfather in his final months. I knew what this was. It wasn't about the money. It was about legacy. Patricia had spent her life posturing as the face of the family. The daughter of Harold Jensen. The moral compass. And now, she was losing control of the narrative. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't comment, didn't tweet, didn't take interviews. That silence infuriated them more than any response ever could. But inside, the pressure built. Jason showed up at my office. No appointment. No warning. I saw him through the glass door, fidgeting with the sleeves of his hoodie, eyes darting. I stepped out. He said, "I need to talk." "Just 5 minutes." I didn't answer. Just walked him to a bench outside. He sat, hands clasped tightly between his knees. He said, "I didn't know she was gonna go this far." I waited. He said, "She told me if I didn't speak out, she'd cut me off. That I was already too much of a liability." I looked at him. My brother, the boy who used to cry when his crayons broke. The man who now looked like he couldn't finish a sentence without shaking. He said, "She has nothing left, Amber. Just the show. If she can't control this story, she'll burn it all down." I said, "Then don't let her." He stood slowly, eyes filling, but he didn't speak again. That night, I found a voicemail from Rachel. She said, "Congratulations, Amber. You've managed to break the family. Grandpa would be proud." I deleted it before it finished. My best friend, Marisol, called the next morning. She worked in media law in another city. We hadn't spoken in months before all this began. She said, "You need a media strategy. Not just legal. They're playing the long game. You need to be 2 moves ahead." I replied, "I don't want to make this public." She said, "You already are. Whether you speak or not. Silence isn't the same as privacy anymore." I knew she was right. But I wasn't ready to go on camera. Not yet. What I could do, though, was rebuild my foundation. Quietly. Strategically. I went back through every document Grandpa left me. Not just the will, the business plans, the operating agreements, the succession charts. He hadn't just left me money. He'd left me a future. The more I studied, the more I saw his intent. Every major role in the business had been structured to transition smoothly to me. Training manuals. Compensation packages. Internal ethics memos. All of it pointed toward continuity. He hadn't cut them out in cruelty. He'd done it because they were never involved to begin with. But facts don't matter to people like Patricia. Image is all they understand. And as the public stories grew louder, the pressure shifted from private guilt to professional risk. Vendors began calling. Minor board members raised questions. My name was in 3 online articles by the end of the week. Elaine said, "It's time. We draft a statement. You won't speak. But the truth will." The statement was simple. Neutral. Clear. It confirmed the legitimacy of the will. It listed my qualifications. It affirmed my intent to continue Grandpa's legacy with transparency and integrity. It made no mention of my family. That restraint was deliberate. It hit them harder than accusation ever could. But the night it was released, someone broke into my car. They didn't steal anything. Just left the glove box open and tore through every document. They were looking for something. I stood in the dark parking lot, heart slow, not panicked. Because I had nothing to hide. But someone else did. And I was going to find out exactly what. The silence in my apartment that night didn't feel peaceful. It felt strategic. Everything in my life had become a kind of rehearsal, for confrontation, for fallout, for survival. Every gesture had weight. Every silence, intent. Even the sound of my own breathing felt like preparation. I sat on the floor with the lights off and the file Elaine gave me spread across the rug like puzzle pieces. Most of it I had already seen. But one folder, a sealed envelope marked with Grandpa's initials, had a note clipped to the outside, only open if it escalates. It had escalated. Inside were copies of personal financial records. Not his. Theirs. Bank statements in my mother's name. Unexplained deposits. A trust fund she had set up under Jason's social security number. A forged letter dated 3 years earlier claiming power of attorney that Grandpa had never signed. I recognized the font immediately, one of Patricia's old resume templates. Sloppy, but bold. Elaine had written in pencil across the top, "Do not confront yet. Use only as leverage." I stared at the forged letter for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. There's something deeply sobering about realizing your worst suspicions were never paranoia, they were understatements. Patricia hadn't just expected the money. She had already begun spending it years before he died. That night, I created a digital folder. Backed up to multiple drives. One copy sent to Elaine. Another to a third-party document service. The last, I printed and sealed in a fireproof envelope. Contingency planning had become second nature. Marisol helped me craft a communication flow. What to release, when, and to whom. She said, "Don't aim for justice. Aim for exposure." I replied, "I'm not trying to destroy them." She said, "You won't have to. Just let them talk long enough." She was right. I began documenting everything. Screen recording posts. Archiving interviews. Recording voicemails. Creating a timeline. Not to retaliate, but to prepare. Because Patricia was unraveling. She had started appearing at local community events she had never cared about before. Crying. Giving impromptu speeches about family betrayal and elder abuse. I saw one clip. She said, "He was old. Confused. Taken advantage of." The same woman who hadn't visited Grandpa for the last 6 weeks of his life unless a notary was present. Her grief was a script. And she knew her audience. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Jason called me again. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. He said, "She's pushing me to sign something. Says it clears her of liability. I don't think it's legal." He sounded scared. I saved the message. The next day, I booked a consultation with a forensic accountant. Elaine joined the call. We reviewed every account from the last decade. The results were worse than I expected. Between 2017 and 2022, over $400,000 had been transferred from business reserve accounts to Patricia's personal investments. All under Grandpa's name. All forged. Elaine said, "This is criminal." I nodded. But I didn't file anything. Not yet. Because I wanted to understand her next move before I made mine. Instead, I scheduled a routine audit of the family trust. Nothing invasive. Just enough to make her flinch. 3 days later, she showed up at the hardware store. Not the corporate office. The original store. She walked in like she owned the place. Rachel was with her, filming it for Instagram. I stepped out from the back, clipboard in hand. She said, "We just wanted to see where it all started." I said nothing. She looked around at the shelves, the floors, the polished counter that hadn't changed in 30 years. She said, "It smells like dust and ego." Rachel laughed on cue. I said, "We're closed." She said, "To what? Legacy? Or accountability?" I didn't take the bait. But that night, I received a subpoena. They were suing me for undue influence. Elaine reviewed it and set it down slowly. She said, "This is a bluff. They don't have standing." I said, "I know. But now I have grounds to counter." We started gathering affidavits from Grandpa's business partners. Longtime employees. His physician. All of them willing to confirm his clarity, his intent, and his independence in drafting the will. Elaine assembled a team. Marisol handled media. I handled strategy. And still, I didn't speak. Because some truths don't need a microphone. They need a stage. The day before the scheduled court date, Patricia canceled the suit. But not before a local blogger got hold of the filings. The headline read, "Heiress Under Fire, Real Estate Fortune Sparks Family Meltdown." The article included everything Patricia wanted hidden. The forged power of attorney. The asset transfers. The inconsistent statements. None of it came from me. I hadn't leaked a word. Which meant someone else had. That night, my phone buzzed. Blocked number. One message. It said, "She has no idea what else I gave him. Call me." I didn't recognize the number. But I had a guess. Because for the first time in weeks, Rachel had gone silent. And silence from her was never accidental. There's a moment in every storm when the sky stops pretending. It doesn't whisper, it doesn't warn, it just breaks. And you either run, or you stand still and let it see you. I called the number the next morning. Rachel picked up on the third ring. She didn't say hello. I said, "Did you leak it?" She said, "I didn't mean to." I waited. She said, "One of the podcasts, they offered money." I thought it would be harmless. Just a quote, a few old texts. But they kept asking questions. I gave them the forged documents without realizing how serious it was. Now everyone thinks I was trying to expose her. I said, "Weren't you?" She didn't answer. But I could hear it in her silence. The fear. The hesitation. The slow awareness that maybe this thing she thought she was part of had never included her at all. She said, "She told me I was just a witness. That I was doing the right thing. But now she won't return my calls." I said, "She won't." Rachel exhaled. A long, shaky breath. She said, "You know she's planning a press conference, right? At the memorial site. Tomorrow morning." I closed my eyes. Of course she was. She was going to use Grandpa's name, his grave, his memory, as a prop. And the press would show up. They always did. I thanked Rachel and ended the call. Elaine was already waiting at my office when I arrived. She had printed the article, annotated it in red. She looked up from her notepad, her expression unreadable. She said, "Do you want to stop this quietly? We can issue a cease and desist, file an injunction against public defamation, and end it there." I said, "No." She said, "Then it's time." We didn't schedule our own press conference. We didn't call any reporters. We didn't even send a release. All we did was leak one date, one location, and one sentence. Ms. Amber Jensen will be responding to public accusations. That was enough. The next morning, I wore black. Not a statement, just instinct. I didn't wear makeup. Didn't rehearse a speech. I stood still in the back lot behind the memorial garden where the press had already gathered. Patricia was there, early as always, in a tailored gray coat with subtle pearl earrings. She was speaking softly to a local reporter, her hand resting on Grandpa's engraved bench like it had always belonged to her. Rachel stood a few feet behind her, arms crossed, face pale. I waited until they finished the first round of photos. Then I stepped forward. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just enough for the cameras to turn. Patricia stiffened the moment she saw me. Her mouth moved, then closed again. A flicker of panic, quickly masked. The lead journalist, a woman named Marion who I recognized from local segments, approached me. She said, "Ms. Jensen, would you like to make a statement?" I nodded. She lifted the mic. I said, "I will speak only once. Then I'll answer one question. That's all." Patricia began to interrupt. I held up a single hand. She stopped. I turned toward the crowd. I said, "My grandfather, Harold Jensen, was not confused. He was not manipulated. He was lucid, clear, and deliberate. The documents supporting this, video, letters, medical evaluations, are now part of the public record. I have made no accusations. I have responded to them." I looked directly at Patricia. I said, "I will not engage in performance. I have work to do." The crowd was quiet. Someone called out, "Do you have anything to say to your mother?" I turned back. I said, "Only that the cameras don't absolve you." And then I walked away. I didn't look back. Elaine was already in the car, waiting with a USB drive. She said, "They'll air it tonight. You controlled the narrative." That was a clean strike. I said nothing. Because it wasn't a strike. It was a burial. That night, Patricia went silent online. Rachel deleted her podcast appearances. Jason emailed Elaine asking about immunity in exchange for testimony. And my inbox filled with messages from vendors, partners, and even distant cousins. But the one message that stood out came from a former employee of Grandpa's. He said, "You reminded me who he was." Thank you. I stared at those words for a long time. Because something inside me, something I hadn't realized was still waiting, finally settled. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because silence from Patricia meant only one thing. She was planning her next move. The first quiet after a public storm isn't peace. It's absence. And absence has a sound all its own. For 2 weeks, there was nothing. No new articles. No phone calls. No subpoenas. No visits from my mother or Rachel or Jason. It was like the entire campaign had simply evaporated. And maybe it had. Because when a performance ends, all that's left is cleanup. Elaine called it the dead zone, the period after exposure when people vanish to avoid accountability. She said, "This is when we do the real work." And we did. We finalized the transition of the estate. Every property. Every business interest. Every outstanding trust revision Grandpa had set in motion. I met with board members, walked them through the long-term vision. I didn't ask for loyalty. I didn't need to. They had seen enough. One vendor told me quietly after a meeting, "We were just waiting to see which Jensen still had a spine." I took no pride in that. Pride wasn't the point. Completion was. Meanwhile, Marisol handled the final wave of public response. She coordinated with one reporter to release a single, quiet follow-up. It wasn't about Patricia or the will. It was about Grandpa's life, his values, the evolution of the business, and my intent to carry it forward. No spin. No spectacle. Just truth. That article changed everything. Because truth, when left alone, becomes irrefutable. After it ran, Rachel reached out again. A short email. No defense. No excuses. Just a line. "You were right. She never saw us. Only what we could get her." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Jason called Elaine's office and left a statement. He confirmed that Patricia had directed every accusation, forged signatures, and threatened to cut him off if he didn't comply. He was granted immunity in exchange for full cooperation. Elaine filed the paperwork to open a quiet criminal investigation. It wasn't dramatic. There were no handcuffs, no cameras. Just a long process of financial examination, internal review, and sealed court records. The only thing that made it real was the letter I received from the district attorney's office. They were investigating potential financial fraud related to the estate. I sat with that letter for a long time. Not because I wanted justice, but because I understood something that I hadn't before. There are consequences. Even for people like her. Still, I didn't speak about her publicly. I didn't respond to the quiet rumors still circulating in certain circles. I let her fade. And she did. Her posts grew sporadic. Then stopped. The interviews dried up. The performances were no longer welcome. She tried to regain her footing through smaller scandals. Implied betrayals, minor feuds. But without the stage, she was just another woman shouting into the void. Eventually, the void stopped listening. One evening, I drove to the edge of town where the old farm property Grandpa had owned still sat. Untouched. Overgrown. A place she had once tried to sell without his knowledge. I walked the perimeter alone. The grass tall, the trees bending softly in the dusk wind. I stood beneath the oak tree where we used to picnic when I was small. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Closure doesn't require ceremony. Sometimes it's just the decision to keep walking. So I did. That same week, I met with the nonprofit Grandpa had quietly supported for decades, a scholarship fund for young women in trades and entrepreneurship. He had never advertised it. Never attached his name. But the records were clear. Hundreds of lives touched. I doubled the fund. I renamed the program quietly in his honor. The Harold J. Fund. No headlines. Just letters to past recipients and new applicants. A legacy re-anchored. The day it launched, I received one last letter from Patricia. Handwritten. It said, "You think you've won. But you'll learn eventually, you need family. Even if you hate them." I read it once. Then again. Then I folded it carefully and slid it into a drawer. Not out of sentiment. But because some reminders are useful. Especially when they come from people who still don't understand the difference between family and harm. I haven't heard from her since. But that doesn't mean she's gone. It just means I'm finally not looking back. Grief doesn't always arrive when you expect it. Sometimes it waits. Until the noise clears. Until everything feels functional again. And then it slips in, quiet and absolute. I felt it most on a Tuesday. Nothing significant happened that day. No letters. No meetings. No calls. Just an ordinary rhythm of a life that no longer included chaos. I sat in my office, the sun low in the windows, the file cabinets humming softly with the old central air, and I missed him. Not the wealth, not the business. Just him. The sound of his laugh. The way he nodded when he listened. The scent of cedar on his jacket when he hugged me. I missed how easy he made it to feel worthy. And for the first time since he passed, I let myself feel all of it. No control. No strategy. Just presence. Grief, I've learned, is what love becomes when it has nowhere else to go. I didn't wipe my tears. I didn't apologize for them. I just sat with them, and let them be part of the silence he left behind. There was no one left to fight. No one to answer to. Just the long, wide stretch of responsibility he had handed to me, trusting I would know what to do. And I did. Eventually. The hardware business stabilized. We opened 2 new locations, one in a rural town Grandpa had always wanted to serve, and another in a downtown block that was slowly being rebuilt by small families and first-time shop owners. I kept his desk exactly as it was. I didn't need it to look modern. I needed it to feel real. A woman stopped me at one of the ribbon cuttings. She was in her late 50s, wearing work boots and a heavy flannel even in spring. She said, "Harold lent my husband money back when no one else would. We own 3 greenhouses now. Never forgot that." I thanked her. We stood there for a few seconds, sharing the kind of silence that only happens between two people who understand gratitude without needing to explain it. Later that week, I took a walk through the memorial garden again. Not for an interview. Not to make a point. Just to visit. The bench was clean. No flowers. No press. I sat alone and reread the inscription. Harold Jensen, 1936 to 2024. Built more than he inherited. Left more than he took. I wrote those words. But they felt like his. I took out the letter he once wrote me, the one I'd carried, unread, since the day Elaine gave me the folder. I opened it slowly. He said, "If you're reading this, then you've survived more than I hoped you would need to. And I'm sorry for that. But I'm not sorry for giving you the tools instead of the shield. I knew the world would test you. I also knew it would never break you. Love deeply. Lead quietly. And when in doubt, build something that lasts." It ended with his signature. Just a scribble I used to mimic as a child. I folded it gently and placed it back in my coat pocket. Not because I needed to keep it, but because I was finally ready to let it go. A week later, I sold the old farm property. To a young couple with 2 kids and a dog that barked so loud I heard it through the phone when the offer came through. They wanted to start a community orchard. Something small. Something shared. I gave it to them below asking price, on one condition. Keep the oak tree. I didn't tell them why. They didn't ask. Some roots deserve to stay. That same month, I quietly stepped back from daily operations. I appointed a new general manager, a woman who started at the register 7 years ago and worked harder than anyone I'd ever met. She cried when I gave her the keys. I said, "He would have chosen you." She said, "Then I won't let him down." I replied, "Don't. But don't forget to enjoy it, either." It took me a long time to understand what I was carrying wasn't just a legacy. It was a lesson. That being the quiet one doesn't mean you're weak. That silence isn't submission. And that real strength isn't in how loudly you speak. It's in how clearly you live. I haven't seen my mother since that last letter. I don't know where she lives now. I don't follow her. I don't look for signs of her name in headlines or forums or whispers. I let her vanish. Because that, too, is a kind of revenge. Letting someone become exactly as small as they tried to make you. I live in a small house now. Far from the center of things. The windows are wide. The floors creak. The garden is nothing special, but it grows every year. And every night before I go to bed, I walk the perimeter once. Not to check for danger. Just to remember that I'm allowed to feel safe now. And I do. I'm not who I was. But I am, finally, fully, who he knew I could be. That is my inheritance. And no one can take it from me.